This week I got to talk with Susana W. Morris about her book Positive Obsession, The Life and Times of Octavia E. Butler. And I became such an Octavia E. Butler fan in 2025. I'm still working my way through her books because she has so many of them, but I really loved this biography of her life. Here's what it's about. As the first Black woman to consistently write and publish in the field of science fiction, Octavia Butler was a trailblazer. With her deft pen, she created stories speculating the devolution of the American empire, using it as an apt metaphor for the best and worst of humanity. Our innovation and ingenuity, our naked greed and ambition, our propensity for violence and hierarchy. Her fiction charts the rise and fall of the American project, the nation's transformation from a provincial backwater to a capitalist juggernaut made possible by chattel slavery, to a bloated imperialist superpower on the verge of implosion. In this outstanding work, Susana M. Morris places Butler's story firmly within the cultural, social, and historical context that shaped her: the civil rights movement, Black power, women's liberation, queer rights, Reaganomics. Morris reveals how these influences profoundly impacted Butler's personal and intellectual trajectory and shaped the ideas central to her writing. Her cautionary tales warn us about succumbing to fascism, gender-based violence, and climate chaos, while offering alternate paradigms to religion, family, and understanding our relationships to ourselves. Butler envisioned futures with Black women at the center, raising our awareness of how those who are often dismissed have the knowledge to shift the landscape of our world. But her characters are no magical martyrs. They are tough, flawed, intelligent, and complicated, a reflection of Butler's stories. Morris explains what drove Butler. She wrote because she felt like she must. Who was I anyway? Why should anyone pay attention to what I had to say? Did I have anything to say? I was writing science fiction and fantasy, for God's sake. At that time, nearly all professional sci-fi writers were white men. As much as I loved sci-fi and fantasy, what was I doing? Well, whatever it was, I couldn't stop. Positive obsession is about not being able to stop just because you're afraid and full of doubts. Positive obsession is dangerous. It's about not being able to stop at all. This is a fantastic biography. I just loved it. I really do think most bookish people and writers as well would really enjoy it too. It just really dives into what was inspiring her, why she felt like she had to write, and like that quote at the end, why she thought obsession could be such a good thing when it was a positive obsession. So that being said, let's hear from Susana Morris. I am super excited to talk about positive obsession, but I also am always interested in getting to know a little bit about you too. So I know you're in academia. I know you've written Close Kin and Distant Relatives was another one you wrote back in 2014, I think. But what was your journey to writing, or even like the academia that you do now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited
Yeah.
to be here. I was a student from the beginning of going to school. I wanted to be a teacher. First
Mm-hmm.
grade, I just, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a teacher. So
Mm-hmm.
that desire persisted all throughout K through 12. I went to college. I thought, I'm going to be a high school English teacher. And when I got to college, I saw professors and I saw what they were doing. And I thought, no, I want to do this. So that's what I ended up doing. Uh,
Yeah.
no regrets. Very happy to be an educator. It was definitely a
Good.
vocation for me. And I also always wrote stories
Mm-hmm.
and, the literary magazine and all the things,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's why being a professor is perfect for me because, you are a professional writer and then, you get to teach, get to interact with students, get to be part of their educational journey. So that's how I got started in academia.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it seems like with both your first one, Close Kin and Distant Relatives, was about the paradox of respectability in Black women's literature.
Mhm.
And then obviously you wrote a biography of a very prominent and fascinating Black woman. Was that, did you always want to be kind of like researching and talking about like Black women's experiences?
I mean, yes and no. I've been fascinated with all
Mm-hmm.
different things. I was an English major. I got my PhD in English and
Mm,
also studied gender studies and African American studies.
yeah.
And perhaps in another version of my life, I am a Jane Austen scholar. I love Jane Austen. Uh, and right now I'm reading some kind of remix of, you know, some Jane Austen kind of mashup where all the characters are in a universe together. It's
Oh, that's cool.
yes. Um, but no, I felt early on I want to devote my life to thinking about questions that are pertinent
Mm-hmm.
to Black women's cultural production. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I studied, particularly in
Yeah.
grad school, and that's particularly what I write about is how do Black women understand themselves, whether it's through these characters and the text they create, or in the case of, thinking about Octavia E. Butler through life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing, like I even connected with you about this in your intro, you kind of talk about how like you grew up in church, but even like Earthseed to you made more sense. Like it wasn't such a graceless, angry version of God.
Mhm.
And that was how I read Parable of the Sower and I was like, oh my gosh, it could be different. Maybe I wasn't taught the loving version of it. So was that kind of your beginning interest in Octavia? And then like kind of what was your moment where you're like, I'm gonna write a biography about her?
Yeah, so I first encountered her work about 30 years ago when I was a teenager. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I had never heard of her. We did not read any science fiction in my high school, and we
Mm-hmm.
definitely didn't read very many works by Black authors, period. So I can
No.
recall reading maybe two books, one in the ninth grade, one in the 12th grade. And so when I discovered Octavia's work, I think it was somewhere before 11th grade, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read a lot and I read promiscuously, but I really loved science fiction and fantasy. And I just was like, oh, I'm
Yes.
not seeing myself represented as kind of whack. I want to read,
Right.
different kinds of stories. And then there she was. So that was the beginning. I read Wild Seed in undergrad. That kept it going when I got to grad school.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, oh, we're waiting for her next book because I went to grad school between 2002 and 2007. And
Yep.
so during that time, she published Fledgling and then also passed away. So we were
Yeah.
waiting for the sequel to Parable of the Talents.
Mm-hmm.
So when I became a professor 19 years ago, which is even crazy to say, but um,
Mm-hmm.
I studied folks like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker,
Mm-hmm.
folks like that. And I wasn't necessarily science fiction focused, but as I evolved in my career, I thought this is really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about
Right.
Butler and N.K. Jemisin and people like that. So
Mm.
from the early 2010s on, I've been teaching classes about Butler and teaching her works in many of my classes, and so um,
Yeah.
started working on the biography in 2020, right before the world shut down. I was like, I'm going to
Oh
write
wow.
a biography, and then everything completely shut.
Oh man, that is crazy. I mean, obviously that happened to plenty of writers just because there's
Mhm.
always people writing. But that would be wild kind of starting it there. Um so I know that you mentioned throughout that stuff from her journal entries, and then every now and then I will see like posts where people have pulled stuff from them. So were you able to like basically read like years of her journal entries?
Yes. So Butler's archives are at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, and it's a public library. You have to
Oh
create,
wow.
get a library card and go through a process because it's not quite like your local library, right?
Right.
There are medieval manuscripts and Butler
Yeah.
papers and all kind of really serious things in there. So you got
Yeah.
to get vetted and so on. But even if you look online, it's open to the public, so it's really wonderful. So there's that.
Yeah.
So I was able to read hundreds and probably thousands of pages of journal entries and other things,
Yeah.
letters and notes and drafts of novels and things. And the thing about Octavia is that she kept everything.
Mm.
So She kept every grocery list. She would, this is the era of the
Wow.
typewriter. So she would sometimes write her letters in longhand, right? Beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and then she would type them so she would have fewer errors, right? She could work on
Uh-huh.
her ideas and be like, dear such and such. There were lots of drafts of letters where she's like, I got to ask this person for money or what's going on with this situation, you know?
Yeah.
And there are diary entries from the time she's about in high school to
Yeah.
the end of her life. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Letters between her and family and friends, just lots of different things. So I call this book a cultural biography. I'm really looking at her intellectual development and how that sort of
Mm-hmm.
mapped alongside key historical and political moments.
Mm-hmm.
I really
Yeah.
focused on her development as an intellectual. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so cool getting to see like those different stages and the subjects that were like really important to her at different points
Hmm.
in her life. And it was making me think back on because I'm also really enjoying reading books that talk about either like other books or other movies. Like I enjoy
Hmm.
even like the cultural kind of what you're saying, conversations that happen around different art. But then with reading Positive Obsession, it was also reminding me like I think it's really easy with celebrities, or in this case, like deceased but revered authors. It's really easy to think like they were this person their entire life long. Or like I am not who I was 10 years ago. And I think it kind of helped remind me of that. Like people are like never one version of themselves the whole time.
Hmm. Yeah, and I try to show Octavia from elementary school until her
Mm-hmm.
untimely death at age 58, she was
Oh,
about 10 different people.
yeah.
When she was 15, she was chronically shy and deeply
Yeah.
introverted, which she would remain deeply introverted throughout her life. That was just
Mm-hmm.
a characteristic, a personality trait. But she was
Yes.
able to move in some ways beyond what she called like a debilitating shyness, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Considering herself like comfortably asocial, like I don't need to be around people every day. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she would, I think, find if she was a 25-year-old today, if I could be so bold to think, I feel like we
Yes.
have a nice little following on TikTok. She would be talking to the folk there, but not necessarily going out and doing all the things, right? Because
No.
that was just not her personality. But she
Yeah.
also cultivated a persona as a writer. So she took her intellectual work and her research really seriously, but she also wanted to
Mm-hmm.
be recognized by her peers and larger public. So she enjoyed
Yes.
getting awards. You
Yes.
whether it's a Hugo or a Nebula or the MacArthur Fellowship, she enjoyed getting awards. She enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
recognized for her work and her artistry. So that person who was crying in class because she had to do a presentation was not the person at age 45 who
Mm-hmm.
could, talk down a heckler, you know,
Yes.
stand on her own, be chauffeured around the world and so on. And in some
Yeah.
ways she was still that girl who was like, okay, I just need a moment
I
to
know.
myself. I want to be in my
Yes.
house alone. I want to read my books and
Mm-hmm.
live my
I
life.
loved that about her. I connect with that a lot. I'm definitely like love to just be home reading books in my, but especially in the bookish community, that's what ended up helping
Mhm,
me kind of become more extroverted, or
mhm,
at least find the people who don't just like drain my energy all the way down.
mhm,
And so yeah, I really connected with that part of her. I think you even mentioned like when she starts doing book tours, like she even knew they were kind of taxing for her, but she had her little things like, oh, I can go to the bathroom for a little bit, which I've done
mhm,
too.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, it's like that part can stick with you, and you can also kind of like you're saying, learn to still feel confident around other people too, even if you love being at home.
mhm.
Um, the other thing you kind of point out is that I know neurodivergent in general wasn't really diagnosed at that point, but I don't know if she was diagnosed as dyslexic. I can't remember which
She's
part there.
self-diagnosed as that dyslexic. This was something
Okay.
when she learned what the term was like, oh, I think that this applies to, you know,
Yeah.
how I, interact with it.
Her struggles with.
Exactly. But, again, I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm just an English professor.
Right.
So I can't diagnose anybody. But as an
No.
educator, I'm just seeing, my
Mhm.
decades of teaching, and I've taught many neurodivergent, students.
Mhm.
And myself, I'm like, I haven't had any official diagnosis. I'm like, I think ADD is real within me.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's more common than not. So in
Yeah.
some ways, the term neurodivergence, divergent from what?
I know.
The idealized neurotypical standard that I don't think
So,
necessarily exists.
I know.
Unclear.
I
I'm not
know.
a neuroscientist, so I don't know.
I know.
But because she was born in 1947,
Mhm.
working class, humble beginnings, Black woman. We already know that we're just really kind of coming into an era where there is increasing awareness around neurodivergence and understanding how it may manifest in women or non binary people,
Mhm.
Black folk. How people mask might
Yes.
matter culturally, right?
Mhm.
It might be exhibited in different ways and so on. And so the way she describes her childhood, her
Mhm.
struggles with social cues, right? She's
Mhm.
very clear about, I don't understand how people are talking to one another. Like, I physically understand the words, but I don't understand
Mhm.
glances they're exchanging or why they think me saying this thing is weird. Or, she was
Mhm.
very, as a young person at least, before she kind of got into the thing that we almost all get into, which is, I respect and love myself, and I may or may not be the same like my peers, but I'm deserving of respect and care.
Yes.
But when she was a kid, she just wanted to be like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
And so this was a struggle. The other thing where her neurodivergence manifested was how she did in school. So
Mm.
she was a very bright young lady. Her mother and grandmother taught her how to read. She was a voracious reader, spent a lot of time in the library. But at school,
Mhm.
she was characterized as a daydreamer, as lazy, those kinds of things. Whereas she wasn't necessarily getting the kind of pedagogical instruction that would have taken her out of her shell in some ways, right? But
Mhm.
when she had a niche topic she was really interested in, well, she could go all the way with that. And so I tell my students she, received like the equivalent of 10 PhDs because of the way that she would research things for the fiction that she was writing. So
Mhm.
the Xenogenesis trilogy, she goes to the Amazon with a UCLA research program with doctoral
Mhm.
students, with professors, and so on. And she was
Mhm.
getting her junior college degree, right? And she
Yeah.
sang with those folks because she had already been doing independent research. She'd already
Right.
looking at the various sources, the etymology of words, reading peer
Yeah.
reviewed articles and books, scholarly monographs. She called herself a news junkie. She was very plugged into the news, the newspaper,
Right.
the nightly news. She wrote many letters to the editor. So this is someone who really lived a life of the mind, but
Mhm.
she had to live it on her own terms because
Yeah.
going to college beyond her associate's degree was so difficult. She tried for many years, but it would be like, is math tripping me up? Is this class tripping me up? And then she
Mhm.
has to work, right? This is not someone who was independent,
Right.
wealthy. And then it's not like she could lean on her mother, who had done very, well by her, who was a domestic.
Mhm.
Again, she wasn't making lots of money, right?
Right.
And she came from a family where folks chipped in and took care of one another. So are we going to
Mhm.
bankroll somebody who, they want to be at home writing? It's like everyone has to work. So
Mhm.
she worked physical jobs, right? And so how are you
Mhm.
doing this extremely physical job for the time that she did work,
Yeah.
doing the intellectual work to write these books, these short stories, and
Right.
also going to UCLA at night and taking the class?
Right. Yeah. It also kind of feels like that example of like, even if you're introverted, if it's stuff you're like really interested in, like that can get you to like want to fill your day that busy. And necessity. I think that's like she like you're saying she was gonna have to work, which is reminding me too of like she eventually is trying not trying, she does break into sci-fi, but at a time when like it truly was like old white men. So it was like she had that going against her to break into it, and what you're saying, there's a good chance there was a little more generational wealth for some of these like white men who could just write.
Right. And who were writing about topics that people thought were, oh, these are the
Yeah,
topics you should be writing about.
commercial.
Why are you bringing race, for example, into it? And so she had a college instructor that said, you shouldn't really include Black characters in science fiction because it's just a distraction. So we get
So,
Martians, green people, polka dot people, whomever, but Black folk, right? So these were some of the messages that she was getting as she was writing. And not all of her books were about race or racism
mm-mm.
or supremacy. However, many, not all,
Yeah.
many of her stories featured Black characters who were they're whenever they appear, they're never sidekicks, they're never flat caricatures. They just exist.
Mm-hmm.
And in some of the novels, like Kindred or Wild Seed, their race is important. And in some of
Mm-hmm.
the works, they happen to be Black, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just depends. But
Yeah.
so many of her heroines are very tall, dark skinned sometimes, and androgynous folk, which basically
Yep.
is what she looked like. And
Yes.
you get to write yourself onto the page, right? And so that
Yeah.
was another thing that she was bumping up against is like, well, her white male counterparts were doing the same thing. They were
Mm-hmm.
writing versions of themselves onto the page, but
Right.
she encountered this. Ursula Le Guin. There are so many of her contemporary, women authors in science fiction
Yeah.
and fantasy were like coming up with it. And of course, she had the extra burden of not being white, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She had the misogynoir. She had it from both sections essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um and yeah, it's like her the only way she's gonna see someone like herself on the page is gonna be to write it, especially in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Um And then so when you were talking about Kindred, it was reminding me, well, Kindred, and when you were saying like the UCLA, like how she would immerse herself and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was so fascinating and also a little bit neurodivergent in the chapter where you say like she wants to go to where Kindred is going to take place. And that she was like, I want to know the country, feel the people. And then I just like connected with this line a lot.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, I don't have to, I could finish the novel without it, but it would be a proper novel. Scope, depth, strength would be sacrificed. I have the gift and the talent of making a little information go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like, and is that like a journal entry too from
Yeah.
her? I'm assuming that's just so cool. I love that idea that she knew about herself. Like if I'm around the data and around this stuff, I will like know what to write about.
Mm-hmm. And that she understood that she had a particular gift and talent. She was very hard on
Yes.
herself. So I wanted to include that entry because that was a moment of her being like, I know what I do well, but if I want
Mm-hmm.
my novel to be even better, I
Yeah.
should figure out how I can get to the Eastern
Mm-hmm.
Shore of Maryland so I can um, put my hands on the artifact so I can see. I mean, she's from Pasadena and she was born in
Yeah.
1947. So enslavement was not a reality for her, right? She understood
Mm-hmm. Right.
her not so distant ancestors had experienced it. So she for sure talked to like her grandmother and older relatives to be like, y'all weren't enslaved, but when you were small children, you knew older people who were. So what did they tell you about enslavement? So she talked to her people. She did her like field research in that way. She read tons of books. And then she found her money, took a Greyhound
Mm-hmm.
all the way across the country so that she could go look at Mount Vernon, right? George Washington
Yeah.
plantation. And she'd never been to a plantation, right? She's from California.
Yeah.
So she went to the plantation, she walked around, she went to the Maryland Historical Society, and she looked at the artifacts, the kinds of clothing people would have worn during the time period, not to just read it in a book, but to physically set eyes on,
Mm-hmm.
look at the scale and the scope. We're so much taller than people are in the past. If you go to any
Oh
kind of
yeah.
replicas or older homes, people were teeny
Yeah.
tiny, right? So she's looking at these
Yeah.
tiny clothes. She herself was 6 feet tall, so she was a large lady,
Yeah.
She's looking at these small outfits. She's looking at the shackles that people would have been forced to wear or the other
Mhm.
elements of torture, what a spinning wheel would have looked like, what other kinds of instruments for, the field or the home,
Mhm.
silver, all of that, so that when she describes the plantation,
Mhm.
as vivid as her describing 1976 which was a time she lived through, and it's not that different from our time, right? When we look
Right.
back and we read 1976, it's like, I just taught Kindred last week in my class, the last couple of weeks, and
Uh-huh.
there's some point where Dana is like, oh, I can't leave, and her husband says, well, I'll call out for dinner. I mean, the difference is we would go on Uber Eats or,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yes.
right? But it's a similar thing versus obviously that was not the case in the 19th century. You basically had to
Right.
make everything that you ate, everything
Mhm.
very much from scratch. So
Yeah.
she wanted to get all those tiny details from the past,
Mhm.
very redolent. And then a novel like that, the one speculative element is a time travel, but everything else is pretty realistic.
Mhm. Yes.
And so she didn't have to do that. She could have been like, I'm riffing off of the past. This is not realistic, but I'm just trying. No, suspend
Mhm.
disbelief for this one thing, but the other things are going to be pretty on point as much as she could, because she said she did write a sanitized version of slavery. It would be very
It is
difficult
still.
today
Yeah.
and give you the real deal that we wouldn't be able to read it, right? But that no historian could come to her and say, well, actually, it's like, no, because I read your book and I'm
Yeah.
taking the information into account when I'm creating this fictional world. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, like it's still a heavy read. There's still some stuff, but yeah, I actually just started Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane,
Hmm.
and that one is pretty desanitized, I think. I could be wrong, and I'm only in, I don't know if you know the structure of it, but it's like four separate stories of enslaved people who rebelled, and it's loosely based off of real people.
Hmm.
And it is, I was like, oh, Kindred was like PG compared to the stuff he's doing there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I get it. And I know her goal was because some of her goal was, you said like she had a friend who was like a black friend even, who was like, well, why didn't our ancestors like do more
Hmm.
essentially? And I did not realize that was like even a held belief among black people in the 60s, like
For some,
feeling that way.
not necessarily
Yeah.
the majority, but I think the thing that's important to think about is like the boomers back then were the Gen Zers of today, right? They
Right.
were young people, and they were, which is every generation does this. I'm an elder millennial. We were looking at boomers like, ugh, guys,
Yes.
what's going on? So this is very common, right? But so
Yeah.
her generation, those coming up the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, are looking around at their elders like, y'all are a bunch of doormats, a bunch of
Mm,
pushovers. Not all the young people, but enough
right.
amount to where this was a conversation topic that was being had. This was a topic of debate
Right.
that folks were like, wait, I don't agree with that at all. And then some people who may have fallen in the middle, like, well, I think maybe they could have done more, but also it was really difficult. And then also not
Right.
the actual history, right? So that people
Hmm.
felt not everybody was Nat Turner, but people rebelled in big and medium and small ways. And sometimes the
Hmm.
rebellion was staying alive. Sometimes the rebellion
Right.
was, you tried to break my spirit, but I still remain. You sold my children, but
Yes.
I took care of the children that were left behind. I still have a family. You tried to
Hmm.
break my manhood, my womanhood, what have you, through these acts of degradation, but I remain here, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes that's the biggest thing that people could do, and that's pretty
Yes.
impressive considering the system of oppression that they were under. But yeah, she had a friend in undergrad, and he knew a lot. He'd read a lot of things, which she very much
Hmm.
respected, because she was also, kind of a scholar at that point.
Yeah.
And but he didn't understand emotionally
Hmm.
what it meant to be someone living during that time period. And that's really
No.
one of the main reasons why she wrote Kindred, so that folks could have
Hmm.
that emotional connection. What happens if you're in
Hmm.
your tidy middle class life, you just bought a house with your spouse, you're a writer, and then all of a sudden you're brought back to the past?
Hmm.
Act.
Yeah.
Would you be immediately trying to burn everything down, or would you do other things, right? And so
Yes.
that's how we get to, the Underground Railroad, like Colson Whitehead, or the book you just mentioned, which, are more graphic depictions. But Butler
Hmm.
is part of a cohort of people that helped to invent the emancipatory narrative, or the neo-slave
Right.
narrative, which is like modern retellings of slavery.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so that genre has evolved over time. And I would say
Yeah.
even the ones, and I mean, there's a scene from the Underground Railroad that I mean, it's in my.
That is, I am so close to reading that one. I just got it.
You should read it. It is beautifully
Yeah.
written. It is so
Yeah.
devastating. It
I
also has
love his
speculative,
writing.
right? It also
Yeah.
has speculative element because he does, write speculatively
Yeah.
occasionally and all of that. But some of the stuff that happens, the level of brutality is, I mean, I had to put the book down and be like, okay, so yeah, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so she's
Yeah.
part
Even
evolution that got people to be able to be like, all right, actually, we're going to do an even more um, stark depiction of enslavement.
right. And I mean, she still, I'm sure not many people were writing about it in general back then. So it's like still having it be palatable is a weird word, but not as extreme as it could have been. I understand where she was coming from with it too. And even Clay Kane, who wrote Burn Down Master's House, in his introduction, he talks about it. He's like, I know this is tricky and I don't want anyone to think I'm writing like trauma porn or like fetishizing the trauma of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand why some black readers and writers feel like it can veer that way, because obviously it can, especially if it's white people writing it. But he talks in his introduction about how he's like, but this is a story to remember the people who did say, like, you can't, kind of what you're saying, like you can't actually break who I am, like
Mm-hmm.
I still have agency. So that's kind of where he was coming from with it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm reading it very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was kind of her, yeah, with Kindred. Like I remember before I read it, kind of hearing some of it too. Like she wanted to be like, okay, here is slavery, and then like the fact that it was at like the 200-year
Mm-hmm.
birthday of America, like that all kind of
Mm-hmm.
worked so well together for Kindred as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then the other thing with her is there are a lot of people nowadays who like call her an oracle or someone who saw stuff way into the future. And I had so many highlights. Like her commentary on Reagan was amazing. Her ability to see that education was going to start taking hits and like we were going to build more prisons than schools. There's so many things she
Mm-hmm.
predicts, even the Make America Great Again in the parable series or
Mm-hmm.
duology. And I think you even talk about how she didn't really love when people called her that. My understanding of it would be that like she kind of like she was just paying attention. And do you have any, I can't remember if you explain it in the book, but for me, I'm like, I would be annoyed too if people were like, oh, it's your magical powers, and she's like, no, I have to be hyper vigilant and I'm paying attention to things, and you could do this too. Do you think some of that was there?
That's 100% it, I think, or most of it. I think,
Yeah.
again, she was a scholar, right? And she
Mm-hmm.
was a student of history. She was a master at pattern recognition. So she
Mm-hmm.
had a really deep understanding of history of what had happened before. So she's looking at the rise of Christian nationalism. She's looking at the rise of conservatism. She's going back to World War II, right? She's a baby boomer. She's, born just a couple years after the end of the war, right? She's looking at Nazi Germany. She's looking at how Nazi Germany
Mm-hmm.
their cues from the United States, right? She's
Yep.
looking at the sort of
Jim Crow in general.
Jim Crow, looking at apartheid in South Africa. She was an
Mm-hmm.
environmentalist, so she's looking at the wildfires near her hometown of
Oh
Pasadena,
yeah.
the hole in the ozone. There's so many different things that she's looking at, and she's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, there are a couple different paths we could take. It looks like if we stay doing these kind of behaviors, these things may very well happen. They could happen soon. If we do this, this could happen. So it's just, okay, I'm going to write about the kind of worst case scenario, and I'm going to
Right.
set it in the near future. So Parable of the Sower comes out in 1993 and it's set in 2024. So about 30 years in the future. So folks would be like, why would you set it in the near, it's so close to 2100 or something like that, you know? And I remember when I read it in 1996 thinking like, oh my gosh, that's like, I mean, I was a teenager. So I thought, oh, that's
Yeah.
so far from now, you know, I'll be in my 40s.
Right.
Right? Well, so funny. But
Right.
in the whole scheme of things, it is not that long of a time. And
And
that's
she was
not because
pretty
she
right.
was right. And that wasn't because she said these things are going to happen. I
Mm-mm.
like to quote her contemporary Ursula K. Le Guin, and Le Guin lets us know that science fiction is descriptive. It's not
Mm.
prescriptive. It's
Mm.
describing what is happening now. It might exaggerate, embellish, to
Mm-hmm.
its most logical or illogical conclusion or what have you, but the
Right.
story is about us. The play is about us. We are
Yes.
at the center, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and so, again, 1993, there are wildfires and environmental disasters, and we have already coined global warming. We hadn't done the shift to climate change everywhere on
Mm-hmm.
in terms of branding language, right? But
Right.
that's already a concern. This is someone who has read Silent Spring, is plugged into the organizations and paying attention, and like, this seems scary. She's looking at the rise of designer drugs, which was a big conversation in the 80s and 90s, and she's thinking about
Oh yeah.
addiction and how that shows
Mm-hmm.
up. She's thinking about droughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wildfires. She's thinking about Christian nationalism and white nationalism. She was raised in the church, but was largely
Mm-hmm.
agnostic as an adult. And so, obviously, she named two of her books after Bible, biblical parables. So she was very familiar with the church. And she
Yeah.
saw how it could be solace for people, right? Which is why we get earth.
Mm-hmm.
There is like
Yeah,
some
and like
benefits for
God as change could feel
right,
better.
but that
Yeah.
people need like a spiritual message. Not all people, but many people thrive
Mm.
by having that. So, is it possible to have a religious message or spiritual message that's not rooted in oppression? That's a question
Mm-hmm.
exploring. And at the same time, we just sort of seeing like this is it's possible. It's not probable. It doesn't have to happen. But I can give a warning. I can write a cautionary tale while there's still time to make key pivots.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is we didn't make the pivots. So now it
Yeah.
sounds like she's like, oh yeah, you know, down to the letter. Let's make America great again. Well, that was Reagan's slogan, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
she
Of
hated
course, she thought it might stick around. Yeah.
so she thought, okay, there's going to be someone even worse than him, and there he's going to be signifying on Reagan because Reagan symbolizes a particular thing for many people, not just conservatives. He had a lot of he was very popular, right? Both
Mm-hmm.
both elections that he won in landslides, particularly his
Yes.
election. I mean, he won pretty much every electoral college vote. You can count on one hand how many he didn't win. So he was massively popular. He had an absolute mandate, right? So she's
Mm-hmm.
just like, this is someone everybody hates. We might have a different opinion of him now, but by and large, not necessarily in Black communities, but by and large, he was pretty popular, right? So she
Mm-hmm.
wanted to say, okay, y'all love him so much, but these things could happen because of the things that he's enacted as president and even as governor of California, because he was her governor. So she knew him intimately in
Right.
politics, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, she was around him. She saw it. Even when I started reading it, the amount of times that maggots are mentioned, which is not a direct anything, but it felt like, yeah, I was like, this is just insane. And for me, I also grew up as a pastor's kid, like the main character, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of a pastor's kid with hyper empathy trying to make sense of that world, I was like, well, I feel that part in this story. So I
Mm-hmm.
really loved both of those. And just exploring the other crazy part to me was like, I think I read it in 2024, But then I think it was 2025 where there's this rise of Christian nationalists who are saying empathy is toxic.
Yes.
And so I was even thinking back to that book where
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
but it's her empathy that like keeps her open-hearted to the world and like
Yeah.
yeah, that I read it at a good time for me basically. But I did like how she explored empathy because the empathy is extremely important. I don't really think there's such thing as toxic empathy in
I mean,
my
the issue was
experience.
her hyper empathy. It's not toxic because she has it. It's toxic for her because other people don't, right? So she's
Yes.
very vulnerable. She's living in a world where there's a lot more pain than there is pleasure, right? So we
Yes.
understand the few places where she's experiencing pleasure is usually around sex, right? Which is also kind
Yeah.
of dicey because she's a teenager and she's,
Right.
hey, she's a preacher's kid. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
there is a particular kind of spotlight on her in her community, and so she's supposed to behave in a particular kind of way. So there's that,
Yeah.
right. But it's a world where she's experiencing a lot more pain than pleasure. So
Yes.
her being empathetic is making her quote unquote weak because the strong people are just indiscriminately hurting others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a call to say that empathy is bad. It's a call to
Mm-mm.
say that cruelty is the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's systematized and deeply embedded into the everyday practice of life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then later on, what you mentioned, you guys were like waiting for her next novel. Like in Fledgling, she she's using vampires in like very creative ways.
So, in Fledgling, she's thinking about, okay, vampires. She was supposed to write a sequel to the Parable series, and she
Mm-hmm.
had writer's block. Her mother passed away, and so she just
Oh
was
yes.
floundering, right, in her writing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to write this vampire story. It's just like heyday. Vampire stuff is everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she says in interviews, okay, well, I thought to myself, what would a vampire need to make their life better? And the main
Mm-hmm.
issue they have, they're almost invincible. But the thing about not being able to go into the sun, if we stay with
Mm-hmm.
that lore, right, which is some of the
Mm-hmm.
most persistent lore in terms of European vampires, right? There are vampire
Right.
type beings in other cultures and countries, and the the sunlight thing is not necessarily as much of an issue, right?
Yeah.
So if we're gonna go with like the kin of Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, and them,
Mm-hmm.
then the issue is going out into the sun. So wouldn't melanin be helpful, right? Having more
Yeah.
melanin, and so she creates genetically engineered vampires, right? They are
Mm-hmm.
humanoid group species that are similar to how when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and so on walk the earth at the same time. That
Mm-hmm.
creating a world where there's more than one humanoid species and that we encounter one another regularly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we find out that the Silks are folks who would rather be extinguished as a species than
Mm-hmm.
to be black, right?
Yeah.
Because we learn in the kind of lore of the world building of the novel that the vampires live a long time, so they would have been around
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of what would become the United States. They would have been slave owners. They would have
Mm-hmm.
been colonists. They, all those things. So even I write, even if they're not human, they are white, right?
Right.
Because it's
Mm-hmm.
a thing that they have taken on. Physically, they look white, but they've also taken on uh, the sort of ideology of white
Right.
supremacy in particular, right? Which not all the vampires do. They're kind of split as a community. Some of them are,
Right.
oh, this is great. We do need melanin. I don't care what we look like. That's great. At least we'll get to be daywalkers. And meanwhile, the
Yeah.
melanin is allowing them to walk around sometimes in Seattle while wearing full, they're fully dressed. So
Yes.
it's not necessarily like they can go live in Cancun and
Right.
on the beach. It's still pretty basic, but at least they won't be burnt alive. This is a huge issue
Yeah.
for them, but they
Yeah.
have internalized and metabolized the idea that not only do they think they're superior because they are not quite human, right? They're humanoid.
Mm-hmm.
They have these preternatural sensibilities, and they can control people through their, saliva and all that. Their version of glamoring, people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're white. It's like all these things together means
Yes.
it's like
Means
eating.
they're great.
So,
In their minds.
in their minds. So it's definitely, I think if we had otherworldly creatures, who's to say that the
Mm-hmm.
werewolf faction wouldn't be tribalist, or that the mummies,
Yeah.
I don't know, because
Yeah.
we're imagining them from our own lens, right? Again, science fiction,
Yeah.
fantasy, it's descriptive. It's a way to talk about our own stuff
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Yeah.
making up things about somebody else. It's about us.
Yeah. Yes. It really is. And that's what I tend to really enjoy with sci-fi and speculative is like it's all talking about what we're dealing with now, no matter if like a phone is called something different or not. Like we're talking about pretty much what we're living in right now, or
Mhm,
things that have already happened. Like that would be the other option typically.
mhm,
Um, and then so the book is called Positive Obsession,
mhm,
and you mention a part where like Octavia thinks of her work as a positive obsession.
mhm,
And like how important it is for her to go after this since she finds herself so obsessed with it. Um, and then it was funny because as I was listening, I was like, this is like me getting obsessed with her right now. But then you kind of mentioned that she almost became like a positive obsession for you as well. So can you kind of talk about that as a theme and as a title?
Yeah, the book has only ever had one title. When I pitched it, I called it Positive Obsession because
Oh,
that is the
nice.
sort of perspective that I wanted to have. That, it's the title of an essay that she wrote, that she published in Essence magazine in the late 1980s. It was originally published as The Birth of a Writer. If you've written for like magazines or online, they'll change your title. They'll change it. You're especially in the internet era, you might call it
Yeah.
something, and you go look at your article a week later and it's called something else because
Yeah.
something has happened, something has shifted, or the
Hmm.
demographics are showing like, oh, well, we'll have more traffic if we name it this or whatever.
Right.
And there was a version of that back then, right? So
Hmm.
she put the essay in her collection of short writings. She called it what she wanted to call it, which was Positive Obsession, because
Hmm.
that was how she described her desire to live this life of the mind, to get up every
Hmm.
day and get in front of her typewriter, to get in front of the notebook, to get on a Greyhound and do
Hmm.
field research, to get on a plane and go to the Amazon and hike so that she could
Yeah.
perfectly describe what it would be like to be in the Amazon. Another thing she did not have to do, right?
No.
But was compelled to do because this was her job and her vocation,
Hmm.
and she took it very seriously. And
Yeah.
it cost her a lot. Now, eventually, she was beloved and acclaimed and awarded and all the things. But for a good chunk of her career, she was broke.
Hmm.
She would have a toothache and be like, "How am I going to pay?" I mean, it's a question that many of us
Hmm.
have today, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I did relate. Yeah.
right? How am I going to pay for these medical procedures? Do I have to hawk my typewriter at the pawn shop and then try to get it back in a couple of weeks? I mean,
Hmm.
really eating beans for dinner, basically. Like this was
Hmm.
very serious for her, and she
Hmm.
could have stuck with a job in the civil service, which she tried to do for a little bit. She could have done clerical work. She could have become a
Hmm.
nurse or a teacher or something. She could have gotten married and maybe
Hmm.
married
Hmm.
somebody who had money so that her life circumstances would have looked different, right? She wasn't opposed to
Right.
partnership, but she really focused her life on the work,
Yeah.
right? In a way that made her illegible to a lot of people. Today,
Yeah.
because of people like her, it makes,
Yeah.
you could say, I'm a writer.
Yeah.
Be a woman, be a black woman, be a queer woman, be whomever, be neurodivergent, and be
Yeah.
proud. Like, I'm a neurodivergent writer. And other folks would be like, oh my God, I am too. But she didn't
Yeah.
have that community
I
in the same
know.
way back then. She did find her people, right?
Hmm.
Fellow nerds, her fellow black women writers, whomever,
Yeah.
but she kind of sacrificed everything to be able to do what she did, and it worked out in the end in many
Mm-hmm.
ways, but there were many costs as well. And so
Oh
I
yeah.
also named the book that to emphasize, like, it's positive. It wasn't like she was out here doing crack, right? No
Right.
judgment, but she
No.
wasn't doing, she was at home writing books. She was at home reading. She was at the library checking things out. She was on the research trip. If she was out with friends, they were often writers or her family
Yeah.
members. But she had many writerly friends. She spent a lot of time writing letters to other writers. I mean, her life was
That's cool.
focused on writing, on learning
Mm-hmm.
things in a time period where the expectation was you get married, you have
Yeah.
children, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
devote your whole life to a vocation. You
Yeah.
devote your life to a family.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, I do that era of women who did choose to not do that. Like it was so much less common back then, even. I'm always so inspired and kind of like you're saying, feel a little bit indebted to the women who are willing to all kinds of jobs, whether it's writing or like even being like, I'm going to be a lawyer. Like the women who were
Mhm.
doing it back then, I'm like, you guys knew who you were and you were going to be that person. And it's inspiring.
Yeah, and there was a cost, right? It could be that
Mm-hmm.
you're alienated. It could be that, maybe you do want to have a family, you do want to have children, you do want to be partnered, but what
Mm-hmm.
are your options out there when you were like a feminist woman who's like, "Oh, my career
Right.
is really important to me." How's that going to work?
Yeah.
Many folks assumed that Octavia, identified as queer, and she did not, and
Yeah.
she's pretty open with friends, like, yeah, like, set me up with somebody. I'm up for, dating and all the things. And
Yeah.
it just didn't really go very far for her. And
Mm-hmm.
she would, note to, in her diary entries or to friends, like, sometimes when she would mention, you go to a dinner party, oh, what do you do? Well, I'm a writer. Oh, that's cool. And then they ask, well, have you written any books? Well, yeah, I've written like 6 books, you know? You would think that would be, oh, yes, wow,
Yeah.
but not
Not as
necessarily.
much.
If that's not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
the case now, right? People are
Mm-hmm.
still having issues, whether we're talking about heterosexual or queer dating, but for sure,
Mm-hmm.
heterosexual dating 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, you wrote 6 books? Okay.
Oh, okay. So you're
You know,
gonna have thoughts in our marriage.
maybe I feel inadequate because I haven't read a book. I haven't read a book in 6 years, and you've written 6 books.
Right. Right. I know.
Versus, oh, you could be my interlocutor. We could talk about things. We could,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, women writers weren't always able to find that in romantic
Mm-hmm.
partners. They could often find it in one another, right?
Yeah.
If they were looking
Mm-hmm.
for male romantic partners, that wasn't always readily available. So,
Yeah. I wish it was. If it was what she wanted. I mean, it sounds
mhm,
like she maybe would have been able to enjoy it, but it is the timing of it. I think it's a little bit easier now. Well, it is easier now for women to want to have a career and to be able to be like, well, if you are going to be with me, like, I am going to want someone who can have a conversation and has read something in their lifetime. But yeah,
mhm,
it'd be so much harder back then to do that.
mhm, mhm.
And and it's just so heartbreaking. I know she had multiple health issues, but even when I got to the part that she died, that passed away so young, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like I knew that's what we were working towards, but it does make me so sad. I wish we could have known
Yeah,
her for a little bit longer. But you've done a
yes.
really good job of introducing us to a lot of her at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was definitely my goal. My goal is to whet your appetite if you
Yeah.
are new to learning about her. Maybe you've just read one book. I hope that people will read the biography and want to
Mm-hmm.
read more of Octavia's work, to read the other biographies. There are other, this is,
Mm.
my book is kind of the first adult trade book biography.
Mm.
There are scholarly works. There is
Okay.
a middle grades biography written by E.P. Zoboy. It's really beautiful.
Oh,
It's a
nice.
set of poems. There's a wonderful kind of artist companion by Lionel George about
Mm,
Octavia's work. So there's all these different things. There's tons of interviews out there you
that's
can watch
awesome.
on YouTube, or they're compiled into collections. So I hope
Mm-hmm.
people will be incited to learn more about her, and I hope that they will also be inspired to pursue their own positive obsessions. So if
Yes.
pottery has been your thing and the wheel has been dry and empty, this is your time to get
Yeah.
the wheel back up spinning, right? If you're a
Yes.
painter, collage artist, podcaster, whatever it is that you're doing, your work is
Mm-hmm.
valuable, and it's important that you do it, whether or not you get the recognition, and you may
Yes.
not, right? But you have something to
Mm-hmm.
share. And the act of just doing that work, that artistic work, is really important, especially for those of us who kind of labor in the vineyard and are not necessarily going to be recognized. And not everyone's going to
Yeah.
get a Pulitzer Prize, or have a New York Times bestseller, but that doesn't mean that your writing isn't important or can't move people
Right.
or shouldn't be shared.
Yeah. I think you want to be able to get recognition, I would assume, especially as a
Yeah.
Black woman. It's because you also are not seeing that happen for many Black women, maybe more now. But it's like you want to feel like you deserve to be a part of it, especially when she was writing so well. Like she deserved to be getting awards and getting noticed. But I guess on the flip side, she probably still would have written whether she got them or not. So it's
Mhm.
like, I think it seems like she knew that, like,
Mhm.
writing is my thing, but it's also okay to want the rewards. And it's also okay to create, basically.
Yeah, all the things, because human beings are complicated. So
Yeah.
she was a professional writer, and she was a professional writer
Yeah.
for most of her life, and so she for sure wanted the bestseller nods. She wanted to be
Right.
invited places. She wanted to be paid well, but also
Yes.
she was going to get up every day and do that work anyway because it was
Mm-hmm.
her heart's calling. So
Yeah.
it's an invitation for the rest of us. None of us are Octavia E. Butler. She was a one of one child,
No.
but we all get to be ourselves,
Yeah.
and we have a duty to ourselves to do the work.
Yeah. My last question, was there anything in the research that like surprised you or kind of like, did you have any revelations like doing any of the research?
I think what was surprising, although shouldn't have been, because I'm a writer. I've written books. I get how it is to create things and to
Mm-hmm.
share yourself with the world. But she was so harsh on herself. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh my gosh. Sometimes being in the archive was really hard. To
Oh,
read how hard she was on herself. Uh,
yeah.
and then to also hear, like, well, have you said similar things about yourself, girl? Like, oh, do you know your writer friends or your artist friends who are similarly down on them? So why am I doing it this way? And you know what I mean? And not in a like,
Yeah.
um, there should be a certain level of like, don't take yourself so seriously. Think the
Right.
work is important, but don't, you don't have to be like so solipsistic or whatever. And then
Yeah.
there's another thing about bashing yourself, right?
Yeah.
And downing yourself. Like they're
Hmm.
not the same, right? So you could be
No.
at a level of like, I'm doing my best. The first draft is gonna be not so
A
great,
first draft.
right?
Yeah.
The first draft, but I'm going to keep
Yeah.
trying because my work is worth sharing. It's worth expressing
Yes.
and all of that. So it definitely gave me pause to be like, all right, well, you see how this looks like, because,
Mm-hmm.
she didn't really say that she was going to give her archive to the Huntington until like the mid 90s. So she's
Mm-hmm.
writing these diary entries from the 1960s, right?
Wow.
For herself.
Yeah.
No one may ever see it. She decided to give it to us, and she could have burnt, destroyed, put
Yeah.
aside the things that, showed like, oh, wow, that girl, why did you talk to yourself that way? She included all of it. She shared
Yeah.
all of it. And so I think that was surprising, not maybe shocking, but like,
Mm-hmm.
and for
Mm-hmm.
sure invited me to reconsider my work differently.
Yeah, it is inspirational when you can see, because you see someone else saying it to themselves and you're like, don't talk to yourself like that. And then you're like, okay, I need to be able to say that to myself.
Right. Calls coming
It's
from
easier when it's someone else.
right.
Yeah. Well, at the end here, you kind of mentioned a couple other books that have been written about her, but is there any other book that you like always recommend to people or that you enjoyed recently?
In terms of Octavia,
It could be whatever.
well, like I mentioned, all the other biographies,
Yeah.
definitely check those out. I would say I just finished reading Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, and I really
Oh, okay.
enjoyed that. And I thought was just really
Nice.
smart and interesting.
Okay.
And so I'm fully into my Libby era where I'm,
Oh, yeah.
on the treadmill, I'm listening to the audio books and so on, and so that's been really a provocative read. It came out pretty recently, maybe 2023 or
Okay.
so. So
Nice.
it's a recent read, and it's all about doubling and sort of politics, leftist politics and
Oh.
far right politics, and how they mirror each other in interesting kinds of ways, and
Mm-hmm.
that. So that was really fascinating.
Nice. Well, I'm adding that to my list.
Please do.
Otherwise, you are on Instagram. Where
I
can people
am. my
follow you?
My handle is Susie at Susie May, SusiMaye. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, also SusannaMorris.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me.
Awesome. Well, I will add that to the show notes so everybody can go check that out. And thank you for talking with me about your positive obsession too.
Much. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.